In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, we will go through a chapter of the Bible and make it make sense in your life today. Studies routinely show that reading your Bible regularly significantly lowers symptoms of depression, anxiety, and anger, whilst also increasing forgiveness, compassion, and a sense of purpose. So if you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Enjoy the show. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. And today, I actually thought I would do a little bit of a reflection on why I even started this podcast and why I even wanted to do these things. And it's because before I used to read the Bible regularly, before I actually tried to understand what the Bible had in store, I would always trust my thoughts. I would trust what I believed, and I would trust all of the emotions, feelings that I would get, and I would basically take them as my own. I would accept them, and I would say to them, you know what, these are my thoughts, these are my feelings, these are my emotions, and I'm going to live and die by them. Unfortunately, I was miserable because of that. I would be late at night, sitting on my bed or sleeping, and all of these thoughts would rush into my brain non-stop, and I'm talking non-stop. Like, it was so hard, and I would say, this is what I feel, and I feel anxiety, depression, so much anger and hatred, lustful thoughts. All of these thoughts would come rushing into my brain, and I would think, this is who I am, right? All of these thoughts are mine, and this is what I should act on, this is what I should be like, this is what I should accept about myself. But the truth is, when you're in control of something, you are capable of stopping it, right? So for example, if I told you, go and run a marathon, if you are truly in control, you could stop running that marathon at any time you wish. But the reason you can stop is because you're in control. So, in that same light, if you are in control of your thoughts, why is it so hard for you to stop them? The reason it's so hard for you to stop your thoughts is because you're not in control. That's the reason why you can't stop them. You can't stop your thoughts because you're not in control of them. And it is for this very reason why it's so important to not trust your thoughts, because someone else is in control, right? If you're not in control, who is? And we know from Revelation that the ruler of this world is Satan. We knew this right from the get-go, right? So Satan is the ruler of this world, and we can either trust our thoughts, which are actually from Satan. We read this in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5. For every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually, or we can trust in something that doesn't change. And what is that something that doesn't change? That's right, it's the Bible. The Bible has been the same yesterday, today, and forever, and will continue to change lives for years on end. And the reason why I trust in the Bible, the reason why we listen every single day is because of this very reason. I just wanted to reflect on this because I don't think we should ever forget that. Right? We should never forget who we are, what we do, and what our purpose is. That being said, we have been reading Genesis for quite a while now, and I hope, again, I keep reiterating this idea that Genesis is trying to indicate or illustrate that there is sin in the world and that we have corrupted the world by our own doing. But because of Jesus Christ, because of God's divinely instituted power, we are capable of breaking the power of sin, hell, and death, and we are capable of, through the grace of God, using what men have intended for evil, we use it for good. That's the message of Genesis, and we're going to come to that conclusion right at the end. That being said, let's actually go through and read Genesis chapter 38. So in Genesis chapter 38, we are going to see some interesting ideas. We talked about Joseph before. We're going to have 30 verses that we're going to go through, and it's going to we're going to interrupt the story of Joseph. So Joseph was sold into slavery in the previous chapter, and now we're going to see a little bit of a detour, and we're going to talk about Judah. Okay. Verses 1 to 10. It happened at that time, this is Genesis 38 by the way, it happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hirah. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He married her and went into her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him Again she conceived and bore a son, and she named Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she named him Shelah. She was in Chezib when she bore him. Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, Go into your brother's wife, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Raise up offspring for your brother. But since Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, he spilled his semen on the ground whenever he went into his brother's wife, so that he would not give offspring to his brother. What he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Okay, very odd situation that was going on here. So Judah marries a Canaanite woman and fathers 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Is wicked and dies because he was wicked in the sight of the Lord. The Lord just cuts him off, kills him. And Judah gives Tamar to Onan to produce offspring for which is a practice which was later codified in Levirate law. That is to say, if the husband of a widow dies, the brother-in-law has the responsibility of being the husband, essentially. You can read this in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 to 6. Just an FYI, we're not under the Old Covenant law, so this is not necessarily something which continues on to this day. Anyway, so Onan refuses to basically procreate with his brother's wife, and this was displeasing to the Lord. We read this in Genesis 38:10, and the Lord takes him away as well. So then Judah delays giving his youngest son, Shelah, to Tamar, ostensibly, obviously, to protect him, but the delay actually leaves Tamar in a liminal and a little bit of a vulnerable state, and we're going to see this later on as well. Okay, so essentially what we're seeing some responsibilities here, and we're seeing some interesting biblical laws that obviously they are no longer present to this day. I think it's important that I keep recognizing that, but it's going to become pertinent later on. Okay, verses 11 onwards. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. In course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah's time of mourning was over, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hirah, the Adullamite. When Tamar was told, Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she put off her widow's garments, put on a veil, wrapped herself up, and sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. She saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He went over to her at the roadside and said, Come, let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, What will you give me that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a kid from the flock. And she said, Only if you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, What pledge shall I give you? She said, Your signet and your cord and the staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her, and he went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she got up and went away. Taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the kid by his friend the Adullamite to recover the pledge from the woman, he could not find her. He asked the townspeople, Where is the prostitute who was at Enaim by the wayside? But they said, No prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Moreover, the townspeople said, No prostitute has been here. Judah replied, Let her keep the things as her own, otherwise we will be laughed at. You see, I sent this kid, and you could not find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has prostituted herself. Moreover, she is pregnant as a result of prostitution. And Judah said, Bring her out and let her be burned. And she was being brought out, and she sent word to her father-in-law. It was the owner of these who made me pregnant. And she said, take note, please, whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah acknowledged them and said, She is more in the right than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not lie with her ever again. When the time of her delivery came, there were twins in her womb. While she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and bound on his hand a crimson thread, saying, This one came first. But just then he drew back his hand, and out came his brother. And she said, What breach have you have made for yourself? Therefore he was named Perez. Afterward his brother came out with the crimson thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. Okay, so we've read all of this chapter. It was very interesting, quite disturbing, and what we see is actually quite disturbing, honestly, because what happens is Judah promises to give Shelah to Tamar, but Tamar doesn't actually receive Shelah as his... Okay, so hang on, let me just explain all of this again. Judah has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Was killed by God because he was wicked in the sight of the law. Onan was meant to be the husband of Tamar, right? Because she's now a widow because had died. And then Onan refused to do the marital act, and he was killed by God. And finally, Judah has one more son, Shelah, who's the youngest. But Judah refuses to give Shelah to Tamar. So Tamar takes matters into her own hands. She disguises herself as a prostitute, seduces Judah, not knowing him at first. He secures his seal, cord, and staff as a pledge. When Judah later attempts to punish her, he was about to burn her for apparent prostitution. Tamar produces Judah's tokens, his seal, cord, and staff, and forces the truth into the open. And it shows something which was very interesting. Her act was desperate, right? But she used deception. And her aim was to secure the right of offspring and place herself within the family line. So, this narrative actually portrays Tamar in a sympathetic manner. Notice she's not the villain in the story, but rather Judah has the guilt in this particular part of the story because he had a failure of duty, and that is a deeper moral problem. And I said right at the beginning of this episode, one of the reasons we read the Bible is because we don't want to trust our opinions, trust our thoughts, trust our feelings. The moment we start trusting our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions, they run rampant in our brain. So we need to distrust them, right? However, something that Judah does in this particular part of the Bible is he says, and he admits his failure. You need to know to be wrong. He says, She hath been more righteous than I. She was more righteous than I. Tamar gives birth to twins, and the birth of one child forces out the other. I don't know if you caught that. So Perez, the name Perez actually means a breacher, right? So it's a little bit of a ironic name. And he forces the other child out, essentially, right? So breacher marks the one who comes... Actually, no, that doesn't even make sense. Oh, wait, no, it does make sense because he was the first to breach, right? So he's the one who comes out first. Perez, right, enters Israel's covenant story. What's interesting is that in Matthew's genealogy that he does for Jesus, right? So in Matthew, so the Gospel of Matthew, basically the Gospel is the parts of the Bibles that describe Jesus' life and teachings. And in Matthew's genealogy, he actually lists Tamar as an ancestor of David and of Jesus. So he says, Judah begat Pharez and Zara of Tamar. Okay, so even though there is a scandal here, notice the scandal is a part of God's redemptive history. That is to say that Matthew 1 chapter 1 verse 3 actually weaves God into surprising people, right? And what that shows us is that God works through the unexpected, and God works even in cases where it seems unexpected and odd, right? So this is an awful situation. Judah went into a prostitute who was actually his daughter-in-law, and then he had a son whose name was Perez and Zara, right? But despite all of this, this is going to be the line, the genealogy that leads to Jesus Christ. And even though what we said in Genesis, what men have intended for evil, God has intended for good. So that is to say, God's providence is not blocked by a scandal. How many scandals do we see all over? All over in our world, in the church especially. But what you have to do is trust that God can work through messy human stories, can work through all of the scandals. And His covenant line, His promise and His message will ring through forever. So Perez, who is the child born from the episode, actually is going to become a key link in the messianic genealogy. That is to say, God's plan, God's redemptive plan includes scandal and the marginal. So when God made you, when He created you for a purpose on this planet, He took into account your stupidity and the fact that you would fail because you are born of sin. We read this right in the beginning of Genesis. We are born of sin. We're going to read this in Romans chapter 5 verse 12. For by one man sin entered into the world, and many were made sinners through him. But Jesus Christ entered the world so that many would be made righteous through him. So don't let sin preclude your righteousness. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help you keep up your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. I upload daily, so if you don't want to miss tomorrow's episode, feel free to rate the show and follow. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And always remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.